Joe Montana, a name synonymous with composure, precision, and miracles, is an irreplaceable icon of the NFL. For over 2 decades, he turned football into a religion of resilience. From a lanky student at Notre Dame, selected in the third round of the 1979 NFL Draft, he steadily rose to greatness with the San Francisco 49ers, transforming a struggling team into a dynasty that dominated the league. With 4 Super Bowl titles, 3 Super Bowl MVP awards, 8 Pro Bowl selections, and dozens of records, Montana became the embodiment of perfection. He wrote some of the NFL's greatest chapters with a chillingly calm demeanor. The catch in 1982, the 92-yard throw in Super Bowl 23 with just 34 seconds left, or the legendary image of Joe Cool looking up in a blizzard, asking a teammate, "Hey, isn't that John Candy?" before leading his team to victory. His 40,551 passing yards and 273 touchdowns are not just numbers but testaments to a fearless spirit. Yet behind the glory was a body crushed by hundreds of hits, dozens of surgeries, and endless nights of pain. A shattered spinal disc in 1986, nerve damage in his arm after a hit from Leonard Marshall in 1990, and lingering pain in his neck, knees, and hips that persist to this day, all were the price of immortality. At 69, he can no longer lift the ball that once carried him to greatness. His hands tremble, his back hunched from countless surgical scars. Each morning, it takes Joe minutes just to stand, and each night, pain shooting down his spine wakes him. Yet he has never complained. Doctors told him to quit in 1986, but he returned to the field after 56 days, throwing 3 touchdown passes as if his back had never broken. Montana never saw himself as invincible. He simply believed that victory belongs not to the strongest, but to those who never bow their heads. Today, with the spotlight faded, he still rises each morning, looking at his scars in the mirror, as if seeing his own legacy. Joe Montana's tragedy is not that he fell, but that he still stands, even as each rise breaks his body a little more. In the 1,960 seconds, Monongahela, Pennsylvania, was a town where the sky and factory smoke merged into one. Rows of chimneys spewed fine coal dust, drifting lazily over the 2-story homes where young Joe Montana grew up. Mornings began with the steel mill's whistle echoing across the Monongahela River, waking the town, while evenings were filled with the sound of rain and the rumble of freight trains through the fog. In that world, where people believed in labor, discipline, and victory, Joe learned his first lesson: love is not given, it must be earned. His father, Joe Montana Sr., was a stern man who rarely smiled, believing strength came from endurance. He taught his son how to throw a football, how to stand firm in the rain, and how to never complain. Each time Joe missed a throw, his father said one thing, sharp and cold as steel: "You're only good when you win." Those words, like a small blade, pierced the heart of the 8-year-old boy and stayed there for the rest of his life. His mother, Teresa, worked as a secretary in a small office downtown. She was gentle but always busy, rarely present for the evenings when Joe wanted to talk about his games at school. When night fell, the house grew so quiet that the ticking of the wall clock sounded like a reminder: strive or be forgotten. Joe would go alone to the backyard, where his father had hung an old tire on a wooden frame. That was his goalpost. Rain or snow, he stood 20 steps away, throwing until the ball sailed through the high circle, hitting the wood with a sharp thud. Each successful throw earned a slight nod from his father, watching from the window, a rare moment of being seen. When the ball missed, his father turned away in silence. Joe understood that recognition had to be earned through achievement. If he wasn't good enough, no one would remember him. At school, Joe wasn't a standout student. He was skinny, quiet, often sitting at the back of the class, shining only when a ball was in his hands. On the field, he didn't shout or gesture much, but his throws were precise and decisive, in a way that seemed uncanny. His coach said there was something in Joe's eyes, a mix of fear and determination, that made people believe he could do what no one else dared. But off the field, Joe remained the kid afraid of being forgotten. After every loss, he quietly packed up the ball, avoiding his father's disappointed gaze. At night, he returned to the backyard, throwing into the thick Monongahela fog. No one caught the ball, but he kept throwing. The wind tousled his hair, his shirt soaked, his fingers bloodied. But he didn't stop. Deep down, he believed that if he stopped throwing, the world would forget he ever existed. Neighbors later recalled seeing a small light from the Montana backyard on many nights, with the silhouette of a scrawny boy throwing endlessly until the ground was white with frost. He didn't throw to win, he threw to be seen. Love, for Joe, was a pass with no receiver. Each throw was a silent plea to his parents. To the world, I am worth something. Please don't forget me. That fear, of not being good enough, carved itself into Joe's soul, becoming the driving force that made him refuse to ever stop. Years later, as Joe Cool, the calm man amid thousands of fans, he still carried that boy, the one throwing in the Monongahela rain, into the night, unsure who was waiting on the other side, but believing that one day someone would catch his pass and remember his name forever. When Joe Montana left Monongahela, he carried with him the sound of rain on tin roofs and endless throws into the fog. Notre Dame was his first dream, a place where he believed he could escape the cold shadow of a father who never said, "I'm proud of you." But when he arrived at the sunlit campus with its golden dome, the small-town boy found himself swallowed again by a world too big. The team had stars hyped by the press, while Montana was an unknown backup, standing on the sidelines during practices, holding a clipboard instead of a ball. Each night after class, when the stadium lights went out, he stayed behind, throwing in the dark, with only the wind answering. Just like those old nights in Monongahela, he threw not to be seen, but to prove he still existed. Coach Dan Devine noticed that persistence, the small student with bright eyes who never complained or gave up, even when no one called his name. "He's got something you can't teach," Devine said. Then, fate chose the harshest winter day to test the young man. The 1st of January 1979, the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. With temperatures below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, icy winds whipping the players' faces, and Joe lying on the bench, body burning with a 102 degrees Fahrenheit fever, skin pale, cold sweat dripping down his neck. Doctors urged him not to play. Notre Dame was trailing 34-12. And the crowd began leaving the stands. But Joe couldn't bear it. He hated the feeling of helplessness, hated watching his team lose without doing anything. When Coach Devine quietly asked, "Do you want to go in?" Joe just nodded, unable to speak. A team staffer ran to get him a cup of hot chicken soup. He sipped it slowly, letting the warmth spread through his throat, as if drinking back his fading belief. Then he wrapped a scarf around his neck, put on his jacket, and stepped onto the field in the blizzard. His breath rose in white clouds, his body trembling, but his eyes burned with the fire of someone who wouldn't yield. Scattered fans in the stands saw it. A frail player with purple lips, still gripping the ball, signaling his teammates to start the next drive. One throw, then another, both perfect. Notre Dame began to score. The wind grew fiercer, but Montana grew sharper. In the final drive, with seconds left, he stepped back, scanned Texas's defense, and threw a high, perfect arc through the thick snow. The ball landed in his teammates' hands. Touchdown. Notre Dame won 35-34. The stadium erupted in roars, but Joe didn't cheer or smile. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking, breath heavy. Teammates rushed to embrace him, but he just shook his head, lips purple, offering a weak smile. "He's back!" someone shouted. The press later dubbed it the chicken soup game, for the small cup of soup that kept him alive to create a miracle. But for Joe, it wasn't a miracle. It was a silent revenge against the fear in his heart. As he left the field, he had to be helped. Each step was a battle between will and body, but his eyes still burned. "I've never felt so alive," he whispered as he sank onto the bench in the locker room. Teammates later said that while everyone celebrated, Joe just sat there, still holding the soaked ball, staring into space. A photo from that day captured his pale face, breath like smoke, and a faint smile under the snowy rain, an image that became a Notre Dame icon for decades. The boy who threw into Monongahela's fog had stepped into the light, not with strength, but with will. The fever, the cold, the exhaustion, they were no longer enemies. From that moment, Joe Montana understood that pain was just another form of energy, that the body could break, but the spirit could not. As the locker room door closed, a legend was born in the blizzard, and America gained someone to believe that miracles were real, as long as someone was brave enough to make them. After the Cotton Bowl, Joe Montana left Notre Dame as a hero, but the professional world didn't easily trust miracles. When the 1,979 NFL draft list was announced, his name appeared only in the third round, 82nd overall, behind dozens of other quarterbacks. Experts called him too small, too slow, not strong enough, not fast enough, not fierce enough for the NFL. His entire career seemed defined by two words: not enough. When he walked into the San Francisco 49ers headquarters, the team that took a chance on him, Joe carried only a small bag and a humble gaze. He didn't talk much, just watched, remembered, and waited. Veteran players scoffed, "What's this Notre Dame kid think he's gonna do here?" But Joe didn't respond. He arrived at practice before everyone, left after the stadium lights went out. Each night, as San Francisco slept, he stood alone on the empty field, throwing at rows of metal chairs set up as targets. The stadium lights flickered, casting shadows on the lean figure practicing until his breath turned to mist. At the far end of the field, only the sound of the ball hitting the ground and the sea breeze through the stands echoed. Joe Montana lived in silence, never complaining, never demanding, like a soldier training for a war yet to come. It was during one of those lonely nights that Coach Bill Walsh, the tactical genius, stumbled upon the rookie throwing alone. Walsh stood still for a long time, then gave a slight smile. He saw in the young man's eyes something no playbook could teach, an obsession with perfection. The two, a meticulous coach and a player afraid of being forgotten, met like two sides of the same coin. Bill Walsh taught Joe about the West Coast offense, a style of football built on rhythm, calculation, and absolute precision. Montana listened, took notes on every word, and at each practice, he worked to turn theory into instinct. If a pass was off by half a step, he practiced until the ball landed exactly where he envisioned. Good enough was never enough. In every simulated drive, Montana learned to read his teammates' eyes, to hear the rhythm of the defense's breath, to hide his intentions in his throwing stance. He wasn't the fastest runner or the longest thrower, but he saw what others didn't, the gaps between moving shadows. Slowly, teammates began to whisper, "There's something different about him." In 1979, Montana played only a few minutes, throwing sparingly in games already decided. No one remembered what he did, but Bill Walsh didn't forget. Each time Joe took the field, Walsh saw something rare, a calmness cold as steel. He called Montana over, put a hand on his shoulder, and said, "You don't need to shout to be heard, just make them believe." From then on, an invisible bond formed between them, teacher and student, but also two companions in a quest for perfection. In the 1980 season, Joe remained a backup to Steve DeBerg. Cameras often caught him on the sidelines, sitting silently, helmet on, eyes distant. The press forgot his name, fans didn't know his face. But every time DeBerg threw poorly, Montana watched closely. Foot angle, tilt, release timing. He memorized it all. At night, he returned to the field, repeating every motion, refining until it felt right. A stadium security guard once said he saw Joe practicing until midnight, shirt soaked with sweat, hands bloodied. When asked why he didn't go home, Joe just smiled. "If I go, who's going to wait for my chance?" That simple answer held his entire essence, not seeking attention, only seeking the moment to prove he deserved to exist. In 1981, as the new season began, Steve DeBerg got injured, and Bill Walsh decided to start Montana. No one expected much. The press called him a temporary fix. But in that silence, Joe had prepared for 2 years. When he stepped onto the field, the stands were indifferent. But Walsh knew. The quiet soldier from the shadows was ready. Everything from his Monongahela childhood, from throwing through fog, from the Cotton Bowl fever, had forged a soul unafraid. Montana threw his first ball, light and precise, cutting through the air, not fast, not strong, but perfect. That was the moment a legend began. Born not in cheers, but in silence, where the overlooked still prepare for the day the world must bow. January 1982, the San Francisco sky was cold and gray as steel. The 49ers, a team mired in failure for a decade, stood at the threshold of their greatest moment. The NFC Championship against the Dallas Cowboys, the NFL's seemingly invincible dynasty. At Candlestick Park, over 60,000 fans shivered in the sea breeze. On the field, Joe Montana, once called too small, too slow, was leading a team no one believed could revive 2 years prior. The 49ers were backed into a corner. With 4 minutes left, they were trailing. Every missed pass, every hit, sent pain through Joe's body. He still felt a dull ache in his shoulder, old bruises lingering, but his eyes held that strange, tranquil light, the light of someone who had conquered fate in the Cotton Bowl blizzard. The final drive began from the 49ers' own territory. Joe took a deep breath, the wind and his heartbeat merging. "One play at a time," he told his teammates. The field seemed frozen. First pass, perfect. Second pass, precise. The clock kept ticking. On third down in the red zone, with 58 seconds left, Joe stepped back as the Cowboys rushed in. DeMarcus Ware, towering over him, charged forward. Montana spun, dodging, running toward the sideline. Everyone thought he'd throw out of bounds to save time, but he didn't. In that moment, everything went silent. Montana looked up, spotting Dwight Clark, his tall, close friend, sprinting toward the corner of the end zone. He rose on his toes, leaned, and threw the ball against his momentum, as if pouring his soul into the air. The ball sailed high, spinning under the dim lights, lost in the gray sky. Clark leaped, arms outstretched, fingertips grazing the ball in a moment that held millions breathless. "He's got it!" The announcer's voice exploded. The catch. Candlestick Park erupted in screams, like a storm of electricity sweeping the stands. Teammates rushed in, red helmets flying into the air. Fans cried, hugged, pounded the railings, while Montana stood still amid the chaos, eyes distant. He smiled, but didn't jump or shout. On his face, that quiet smile wasn't one of joy, but of someone who'd just seen the mountaintop and knew the path ahead only descended. He smiled, but deep down he feared how high he had just climbed. Across the field, the Cowboys stood stunned. On TV, Bill Walsh clutched his head, then laughed through tears. That throw, the final 6 yards, sent the 49ers to their first Super Bowl, ending Dallas's reign and launching San Francisco's era. As the clock hit 0, Montana walked slowly across the field, shaking opponents' hands. No halo surrounded him, just a terrifying calm. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Someone asked what he was thinking during the throw. Joe gave a slight smile. "I just tried to get the ball where it needed to be." That simple answer stunned America. In an era of flamboyant athletes, Joe Montana was a paradox, a hero without fanfare, a genius ruthlessly humble. That night, in the locker room, teammates cheered. Laughter and champagne corks echoed. But Joe sat quietly in a corner, still in his mud-stained uniform, holding a white towel. Bill Walsh approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did what no one dared to dream." Joe looked up, eyes distant. "Coach, I'm scared." "Of what?" Walsh asked. "That this is my peak." Walsh gave a sad smile, saying nothing. He understood. Perfectionists like Montana never savor victory. They only see its cost. That night, San Francisco didn't sleep. Headlines screamed, "Montana's miracle." But in his dark hotel room, Joe lay still, back against the wall, staring out the window as fog drifted past. He thought of his father, of childhood nights throwing in the rain, of the loneliness when his father nodded and turned away. He knew this throw, this blazing light, didn't erase the old emptiness. The difference now was that the world was watching, and he had nowhere left to hide. In his brightest moment, he felt cold. The catch made Joe Montana a legend. But it also began another tragedy. From now on, every pass would be measured against that miracle, and every mistake magnified into a fall. As Candlestick Park faded into darkness, Joe stood gazing at the stands, where the crowd had left, fog settling over the grass like a gray blanket. He took a deep breath, his hand brushing the ball in his jacket pocket. The light born that day was already fading, and Joe Montana, America's new hero, knew that glory like the ball in his hand could slip away into the fog with one small misstep. After the catch, America was swept up in a fever called Joe Montana. The San Francisco 49ers, once a mediocre team, became the emblem of an era, a dynasty of elegance, intelligence, and absolute composure. In the spring of 1982, Montana led the team to Super Bowl XVI, where the light of glory enveloped him like a blazing golden flame. At Pontiac Silverdome that day, amid tens of thousands of fans, Joe Montana stood in a man-made blizzard, white confetti falling across the stands like an out-of-season snowstorm. The stage lights illuminated his face calm, cold as stone. The 49ers won, bringing home the first Lombardi Trophy in team history. From that moment, Joe Montana was no longer just a player. He was the symbol of calm in the storm. In 1984, then 1988, and 1989, he and Bill Walsh led the 49ers to the pinnacle of world football. 4 championship trophies, 3 Super Bowl MVP awards. In that era, Joe was no longer human, he was the idea of perfection. His final drives became legendary, his throws dissected frame by frame, every breath recorded as a lesson for future generations. They called him the God of Calm. In Super Bowl XXIII, an eternal moment was born. The 49ers trailed the Cincinnati Bengals, with just over 3 minutes left. Montana stepped into the huddle, his teammates' eyes tense. He glanced around, pointed to the stands. "Hey, isn't that John Candy?" The team burst into laughter. With one sentence, no tactics, no rallying cry, he shattered the fear gripping their hearts. Then he led a 92-yard drive, the longest in Super Bowl history, at the time ending with a perfect pass to John Taylor for the game-winning touchdown. The stadium erupted, while Joe only smiled faintly, removed his helmet, and took a deep breath, as if he'd just finished a drill in his backyard. In that moment, he wasn't just the 49ers leader, he was the embodiment of what America revered: composure, precision, and invincibility. But after each such moment, his body bore another crack. The falls in the huddle, the relentless hits left his shoulder burning, his neck stiff, his knees swollen. Montana began living with pain only he understood. Each morning before practice, he soaked his shoulder in ice for hours just to grip the ball. The 49ers medical staff said he had a pain tolerance beyond human. Teammates recalled moments in the locker room when he sat silently, eyes empty, staring into space, hands still clutching the ball, sweat dripping onto the floor. Outside, the world celebrated Joe Cool, but inside, Joe Montana was beginning to break apart piece by piece. The relentless hits, the head collisions, the sleepless nights. His body begged for relief, but the glare of glory wouldn't let him stop. Bill Walsh, his coach, his confidant, often saw Joe hobbling down the hallway after games, back hunched, lips pale, yet still smiling when someone noticed. He whispered to Walsh, "Don't let anyone see me weak." Walsh nodded, understanding that Joe's composure wasn't just instinct, it was a fragile armor hiding a fractured body. After each title, each victory, Joe felt emptier. Fans, media, sponsors, they all demanded he remain perfect forever. They called him the king who never trembled. But Joe knew the truth. He trembled every night, not from fear of losing, but from fear of no longer being himself if he stopped winning. Glory had become a gilded prison. "Perfection is a cage with golden bars," he once told his close friend Dwight Clark over drinks after practice. "I locked myself in it, and everyone calls it paradise." That comment, Dwight later recounted, was a rare glimpse into the darkness in Joe's heart. At home, his wife Jennifer saw the change more clearly than anyone. Joe spoke less, smiled less, often woke at night from back pain or numbness in his arm. Once, she found him sitting in the living room chair, holding a Lombardi trophy, its gleaming light reflecting on his gaunt face. "Why are you looking at it?" she asked. Joe was silent for a long time, then replied softly, "To remember how much I paid for it." In the 1989 season, Joe Montana reached the final peak of his career. Super Bowl 24 saw the 49 EREs crush the Denver Broncos 55-10, the largest margin in history. He was named MVP for the third time, becoming a global icon. Camera flashes, endorsements, money, fame, it all poured in like a flood. But in the locker room, he said only one thing to his teammates: "Don't let this change who you are." Looking back, those words sound like the advice of someone who knew all light fades. When Bill Walsh left the team, Joe lost the one person who understood his loneliness. The higher he stood, the thinner the air. He began to feel tired, not just in body but in soul. One night, after an awards dinner, Joe drove home across the Golden Gate Bridge, cold wind whipping his face, the city glittering below. He turned off the radio, looked at the vast night sea, and thought, "If I don't win tomorrow, will they still remember my name?" At 33, Joe Montana had it all: wealth, fame, love, and America's reverence. But the price of immortality was solitude. Outside, they saw the god of calm, a fearless man. Inside, he was still that boy from Monongahela, standing in cold rain, throwing into the night only now. The whole world watched, and no one saw that each throw was a silent cry for help. After the golden years when the San Francisco 49ers dominated the NFL and Joe Montana was hailed as the god of calm, the cost of perfection began to surface. In 1986, during a seemingly routine practice, Joe felt a sharp pain like a knife slicing down his spine. He collapsed, cold sweat pouring, the world spinning. The diagnosis stunned everyone: a torn spinal disc, compressed nerves, and a real risk of paralysis if he kept playing. Doctors urged him to retire immediately. Joe just stared silently at the hospital room's white ceiling. For others, it would have been the end. For Joe, it was just another crack in his endless fight against fate. "I'll be back," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. 56 days after spinal surgery, Joe Montana returned to the field, an act his own surgeon called insane. But Joe threw. His first throw that day was weak, low, but when the ball reached his teammates' hands, the practice field fell silent. He stood up straight, wincing, sweating coldly, but his eyes lit up the eyes of someone who'd thrown into the night countless times. Yet the crack in his body never fully healed. The dull pain spread through his back, shoulders, and hands. He hid it under his armor, under the Joe Cool smile America loved. No one knew that each morning before stepping onto the field, he soaked in an ice bath to numb the pain. The world saw only a perfect Montana, never trembling, never missing a beat. while he was quietly breaking apart inside. In the 1990 season, Candlestick Park was cold as metal when the 49ers faced the New York Giants in the NFC Championship. It was a fateful game. In the fourth quarter, with minutes left, Joe stepped back, scanning for a receiver. From behind, Leonard Marshall, a massive Giants defender, charged. The hit was like an explosion. Joe was thrown into the air, crashing to the ground with a chilling thud. The stadium went silent. As the referee ran over, he lay motionless. His helmet's face mask was caked with mud, his chest still. Medics rushed him off the field. The diagnosis: a fractured sternum, a concussion, severe damage to the ulnar nerve in his right arm. Doctors said a failed surgery could mean he'd never close his fist again, let alone hold a ball. Joe looked at his right hand, the hand that had thrown thousands of passes in rain, snow, blood, and tears, now trembling, numb. He didn't cry, but his eyes dimmed, not from pain, but from fear. Doctors said he'd need months to recover, with no guarantee of returning. "Retire, Joe," Bill Walsh said softly, but he replied, "If I stop, I'll die." The surgery lasted 8 hours. When he woke, his arm was bandaged, tubes snaking around him. In the hospital room, only the slow beep of the heart monitor sounded. Jennifer, his wife, sat by the bed, holding his left hand, tears streaming. He tried moving his right hand, but felt nothing. A single tear rolled down his cheek, the first in years. He asked for a football from a team assistant. When it was placed in his hand, he tried to grip it, but the ball fell, rolling slowly under the bed. For the first time, the ball slipped, and so did his identity. For Joe, it wasn't just a physical fall, but a fall of the soul. He didn't know who he was if he wasn't the one throwing the ball. The weeks that followed were grueling physical therapy, moving fingers, bending wrists, relearning to hold objects. Sometimes the pain made him pass out. At times, he shouted in despair, "Why can't I feel it anymore?" Jennifer held him, but no words could soothe him. The media began writing that Montana's era was over. TV stations replayed "The Catch" like footage from a distant past. Outside, the world still glorified Joe Cool. Inside, the man fought his own body every hour. Pain became his companion. Some nights, he couldn't sleep, staring out the hospital window, the moon reflecting on the glass, his silhouette frail and blurred. He recalled his father's words, "You're only good when you win." But this time, victory was out of reach. It took over a year for Joe to throw again. Each throw was a battle against pain and fear. When the ball flew, he wasn't sure if he'd feel it land in his hands anymore. But he kept practicing, day after day, alone on an empty field. Once, a coach saw him at night, throwing in the rain, his right hand trembling after each throw. "Why are you doing this?" the coach asked. Joe replied softly, "Because if I stop throwing, I'll disappear." The truth was, Joe Montana's body was shattered, but his soul wasn't. In those years, each scar was a new chapter, each grip on the ball a declaration that he was still here. When Montana finally returned to the field, fans roared wildly, but only he knew. Beneath that armor, his body was like a building with broken beams, waiting for one final hit to collapse. And though every throw sent pain shooting through his arm, Joe Montana stood firm. Some people are born not to flee their wounds, but to live with them, as proof that a soul still lives in every throw. When Joe Montana returned to the field after years of surgeries and physical therapy, America rose to welcome him as if a king had reclaimed his throne. But time, the invisible enemy even legends can't defeat, had begun to exact its toll. Beneath the red number 16 jersey was a broken body held together by will. Each throw was a knife, each run a test. Doctors told him, "One more fall, and you may never walk again." Joe just smiled, as if he'd heard that 100 times and still chose to return. But as the 49ers entered the early 90 seconds, another name emerged: Steve Young. Young, Swift, sharp, dubbed the future. At every practice, Young's footsteps echoed behind Joe like the beat of an approaching future. The media wrote harsh headlines. Montana's era is over. They said Young brought speed, strength, and freshness that Montana's 5-year-old body could no longer muster. And Joe, the man who taught America to believe in miracles, now sat on the bench, scarf around his neck, silently watching the field. When Steve Young took the field, the crowd roared. When cameras panned to Joe, only scattered applause followed. He wasn't angry or bitter, just looked down at hands scarred by too many surgeries. The fingers that once held 4 Lombardi trophies now trembled when clenched. He wasn't beaten. He was replaced. No one defeated Joe Montana. Time simply replaced him. In his final games with the 49ers, Joe was occasionally brought in, like a living memory summoned amid the present. The stadium rose to clap, but when the whistle blew, attention turned back to reality. Young's era had begun. Bill Walsh, his coach and confidant, had left the team. Familiar faces from the 80 seconds were fading. Montana, who once commanded this kingdom, was now a quiet traveler in his own home. During practices, he stood on the sidelines watching Young lead the team, correct teammates things he once did. It wasn't betrayal, just the cruel cycle of a world that waits for no one. One afternoon after practice, Steve Young approached, placing a hand on Joe's shoulder. "I don't want to take your place." Joe smiled. "You didn't take anything. You're just doing what I did to someone else." The words were light as air, but his eyes held a deep sadness. It was the serenity of someone who knew no glory lasts forever. Only time leaves its mark of pain. In the 1992 season, injuries flared again. Joe spent most of the season on the bench, watching Young throw, score, and be hailed as the new savior. On the stands, signs reading, "We love you, Joe," dwindled. Instead, "Young is our man," appeared. Each time the crowd chanted for his successor, Joe just bowed his head. Former teammates said that once, in the locker room after a win, Joe sat alone long after the team left. The dim yellow light shone on his tired face. He whispered, "It's strange. I'm still here, but it feels like I'm gone." At 37, Montana knew his reign was over. No scandal, no betrayal. Just the terrifying silence of being forgotten. In sports, they don't kill old kings, they just stop talking about them. And that silence hurt more than any loss. Early in 1993, the final decision came. The 49ers would let Montana go, handing the future to Steve Young. The day he cleared out his locker at the training facility, there were no cameras, no farewell ceremony. Just a man quietly packing photos, a red jersey, and an old football. Jennifer said he didn't speak the entire drive home. At the Golden Gate Bridge, he stopped, got out, and looked at the ocean. The wind was fierce, the sea salt biting. He stood there a long time, hands in pockets, eyes distant. "Do you know what it's like when a city that once chanted your name goes silent?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. No words could share the loneliness of a king dethroned by time. When Montana signed with the Kansas City Chiefs, the press called it the final chapter of a legend. But Joe knew. It wasn't a final chapter, just an unfinished draft. He left San Francisco without a crowd, without fanfare, only the sunset stretching across the bay. Behind him was the monument he'd built, now belonging to another. As the car passed the Leaving San Francisco sign, Jennifer saw him turn away, eyes red. No one witnessed, no one filmed. But if they had, they'd have seen a tear roll down the cheek of the man America believed could never fall. A legend wasn't defeated, just replaced. When Joe Montana signed with the Kansas City Chiefs in 1993, America held little expectation. They called him a hero of the past, a beautiful name whose time had gone. Newspapers wrote that he came to Kansas not to win, but to say goodbye with dignity. But Joe never knew how to let go. In his eyes still burned the fire of Monongahela, Notre Dame, San Francisco, where each time the world turned away, he returned stronger. On his first day in the new red jersey, Joe stepped onto the practice field among young players who grew up watching him on TV. There was a hint of awe in their glances, but also respect. A young player said, "I thought you were a legend, not a real person." Joe laughed, crow's feet crinkling. "Trust me, real people hurt a lot more." At 37, he brought to Kansas something they'd never had belief. Though his body was worn, his throws less powerful, that composure, the reason the world called him Joe Cool, remained untouched. In his debut, the Chiefs faced the Denver Broncos. Joe's knees were taped, his shoulder iced, but when the opening whistle blew, Arrowhead Stadium came alive. In the final minute, with the score tied, Montana led his team down the field, step by step, yard by yard, tick by tick. With 8 seconds left, he threw a short pass to Marcus Allen touchdown. Fans roared, red flags waving across the stands. A reporter said, "We just saw the old magic return." That phrase became the emblem of that season, the year Joe Montana turned Kansas City from a forgotten team into Middle America's pride. Under his leadership, the Chiefs won 11 straight games, reaching the AFC Championship, something they hadn't done in over 2 decades. Joe played with the body of a man eroded by time, but the spirit of a warrior who never surrendered. Before a game against the Houston Oilers, a doctor stopped him at the locker room door. "Joe, you can't play. Your right wrist is twice its normal size." He glanced at his bruised wrist and said, "I don't need a wrist to lead." On the field, he threw 3 touchdown passes. Each Chiefs victory under Montana was more than a sports win. It was proof of will, triumphing over age and pain. But inside, his body was crumbling. Old scars ached, each fall a warning. When the Chiefs lost to the Buffalo Bills in the AFC Championship, Montana took a hard hit to the head, collapsing on the field. He lay still for a long moment, the crowd's noise fading, only a ringing in his ears. When he opened his eyes, he saw a cloudy sky, light snow falling, and his teammates' worried faces above. "You okay, Joe?" someone asked. He nodded faintly, struggling to stand, legs trembling. Doctors said he shouldn't continue. Joe knew this was likely the end, but he didn't leave the field. He threw a few final passes, not to score, but to finish with honor. After the game, he walked slowly past a line of reporters. Camera flashes dazzled. Questions flew. "Was this your last game?" Joe just smiled, voice hoarse. Maybe just the last of the season. But his eyes told the truth he knew. As he climbed to the stands, Arrowhead Stadium rose, chanting, "Joe, Joe, Joe," a sound like a farewell hymn for a king leaving his throne for the last time. He turned, raised a hand, smiled gently, eyes misty. In the locker room, he lingered long after his teammates left. Only the hum of the heater remained. He removed his wrist tape, his shoes, his feet swollen and bruised. His jersey was soaked, cold. On a nearby chair was an old football someone left behind. Joe picked it up, tried to spin it, a numb sensation running through his fingers. A drop of sweat, or a tear, fell. He looked at the ball, whispering, "The final whistle didn't just end a game. It ended a life I had built." Outside, the Kansas winter was cold and quiet. He left the stadium, looking up at the fading lights. Every game, every season, every scar like pieces of a life left behind. He'd won more than anyone, but now, all that remained was an emptiness nothing could fill. On the night flight home, Joe stared out the plane window, watching clouds drift by. Jennifer touched his shoulder. "You okay?" He smiled faintly. "I'm just learning to let go." As the plane landed, he knew the final chapter of his career was written. No fireworks, no parade, just a man who'd poured his soul into the game, sitting silently as the world moved on. In the years that followed, people still called him the Old Magic, but Montana knew better than anyone. Magic only exists when people believe, and he had believed until the very last moment. When the stadium lights faded behind him, Joe Montana stepped into a different world. No more cheers, no more camera flashes, no more familiar red helmet. After retiring in 1995, the once king of San Francisco vanished from the spotlight as if he'd never existed. But the silence didn't bring peace. It only let old wounds resurface. His spine, cut open 3 times, began to stiffen like rusted iron. The nerves that once guided legendary throws now betrayed him, sending jolts of pain like electric shocks. His neck, having endured 3 surgeries, and his right hand, once holder of 4 Lombardi trophies, now swelled, fingers curling inward. Many nights Joe woke sweating, his hand cramped as if clamped in cold steel. Jennifer woke too, trying to straighten his hand, hearing his ragged breaths. "Does it hurt a lot?" she asked. He only nodded, silent. For Montana, physical pain had become a familiar rhythm, but what he feared more was the erosion of memory. Every morning, he rose slowly, taking nearly 10 minutes to stand upright. His body was like an old machine, each part needing time to start. Every step in the house was a physical therapy session. Jennifer said some mornings he had to lean against the wall to avoid falling. The hero who once moved like the wind on the field now counted each step in the quiet halls of their Napa Valley home. Doctors prescribed a slew of painkillers, opioids, anti-inflammatories, muscle relaxants, but Joe hated taking them. "They make me foggy," he said. "I need to feel the pain to know I'm still alive." Those words, simple yet tragic, were a confession from a man who once conquered the world, now fighting only his own body. He used to fear losing a game. Now he feared losing his own body. No more practice fields, no teammates, no one shouting his name. In the afternoons, he went to the backyard, picked up an old football, and threw lightly a few times. His hand hurt so much he stopped after 3 throws. The ball fell, rolled across the grass, and he just watched helpless, silent, like an old man seeing his youth slip away, unable to chase it. Reunions with teammates grew rare. Dwight Clark, who caught the catch, was weakening from ALS. At their last meeting in 2016, Dwight gripped Joe's hand, voice faint. "My hands don't feel anything anymore, Joe. You know that feeling, don't you?" Joe nodded, eyes red. 2 friends, 2 legends, now shared the language of those who soared high and fell to earth on their own wings. Old friends drifted away, some passed, some changed numbers, some too busy to call. Only Jennifer remained the wife by his side for 4 decades, quietly making breakfast, sorting pills, helping him breathe deeply to ease spasms. On cold days, she wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, her hand resting on his back, where a long scar still rose under his skin. Joe smiled, saying softly, "It hurts, but at least I can still feel." Those words made her turn away to hide tears. Evenings, the large house sank into silence. No crowd noise, just the ticking clock and his uneven breaths. Sometimes, he replayed old tapes: The Catch, The Drive, Super Bowl 23. The screen showed a young man, eyes blazing, throwing the fateful pass. Joe watched, not with pride, but with deep doubt. Was that really me? Once, a reporter asked if he missed the field. He gave a sad smile. "I miss feeling healthy more than winning." The irony was that the man who taught the world pressure couldn't break a person was now imprisoned by his own body. Pressure no longer came from opponents, but from numb legs, sleepless nights, and the silence of a room without fans. Yet, in the dim shadow of age and illness, a spark of his old character lingered. He didn't complain, didn't whine. Each morning he went to the garden, doing light exercises as doctors instructed. Sometimes it took an hour to bend and touch his knees, but he persisted. "If I stop trying, I'll die," he told Jennifer. Those who saw Montana at his peak said his composure never left him. Now it was used to endure, not to win. As sunset fell over Napa Valley, Joe sat in a wooden chair, watching the light fade. Hands on his knees, fingers slightly curled. He knew he was no longer the Joe Montana America worshipped. But in that fading light, something still shone, a peace mixed with sadness. Because deep in that man's heart, football never left. It just moved from throws on the field to the faint beat in his chest, where every breath reminded him he was still here, still alive, though his body had betrayed him, and time was no longer kind. In the years after the lights went out, sleep became Joe Montana's greatest opponent. The man who once made America hold its breath in the final seconds of a Super Bowl could no longer close his eyes peacefully for a night. His body, once a tool of absolute precision, betrayed him piece by piece. His right fingers lost sensation, as if the nerves had forgotten their way back. Joe stopped playing golf, a sport he loved post-retirement. Holding a club was hard. Controlling the ball's direction was impossible. "I can't feel the force anymore," he said. "It's like I'm throwing with someone else's hand." Each evening, as the house grew quiet, Jennifer heard his labored breaths, sometimes a faint groan from the bedroom. Some nights, he jolted awake, eyes panicked, forehead drenched in sweat. "He wakes up screaming sometimes," she told a friend, "not from nightmares, but from pain that makes him think he's still being hit." Doctors said it was the aftermath of mild concussions, things no one cared about in the 80 seconds. Now, they made Joe a prisoner in his own mind. Small noises, a creaking door, clinking dishes startled him, heart racing. Some evenings Jennifer lay still, watching him sit on the bed's edge, the bedside lamp casting light on his pale face. Joe couldn't sleep, nor could he stay fully awake. In that gray space, past and present blurred. In his mind echoed crowd roars, referee whistles, the thud of his body hitting the grass. His lips moved, as if calling out, "Dwight, Bill, Steve," then fell silent. At dawn his eyes were bloodshot, lips chapped. Jennifer made coffee, set it by the bed, and said softly, "You need to sleep." He replied quietly, "I slept for 20 years. Now I just want to stay awake." But that wakefulness was torture. Without sleep, back pain flared. Without sleep, memories flooded. To cope, Joe began writing. By the bed, he kept a small, worn leather notebook. When pain or memories struck, he took a pen and wrote a few lines. Not long, not poetic, just words, "Still here, still hurts." Some pages repeated those lines for pages, as if he feared stopping would make him vanish. Jennifer read it, quietly closed the notebook, and left it as it was. She knew it was his only way to fight, not against time, but against the silence eating at him. Once, a reporter visited, asking if he missed the feeling of victory. Joe gave a faint smile, voice hoarse. "I miss feeling healthy more than victory." Those words silenced the room. No one knew that behind the gentle smile were long, dark nights where the rain on the roof sounded like the fading cheers of years past. He tried meditation, sleeping pills, sound therapy, but nothing helped. One night, Jennifer woke to find him on the porch, holding an old football, staring into the void. "What are you doing?" she asked. He smiled sadly. "Just checking if I can still throw." Then he threw. The ball sailed slowly, fell onto the wet grass, and rolled into the dark. He watched, eyes distant. In that moment, the night became the final stadium. He couldn't conquer, a place with no fans, no teammates, only heavy breaths and memories dissolving like fog. Sometimes, he thought of Bill Walsh, who died in 2007. He told Jennifer, "I wish I could call him, just to say I'm still trying." She held his hand, feeling his cold, stiff fingers. Time was no longer a flow, but an open wound. Yet Joe never let pain win. He still rose early, still walked, still smiled for fans seeking autographs. But those who looked closely saw something quiet in his smile, a weariness mixed with pride, as if he understood that no one wins forever, but how one endures defeat can also be a form of glory. And in those long, sleepless nights, as darkness covered everything, Joe Montana sat there, hands trembling on the old notebook, writing one more line, "Still here, still hurts." It wasn't just a confession, but a vow from a man who spent his life fighting to be remembered by the world and by himself. In September 2020, Malibu was quiet as ever. The ocean murmured offshore, a breeze drifting through the wide windows of the wooden hillside house. Joe Montana, then 64, had grown used to quiet evenings, Jennifer reading, him watching old 49ers clips, then tucking in their 9-month-old grandchild, small and peaceful in a crib in the living room. After years enduring physical pain, Joe thought his life was done with battles. But that night, fate tested the man who'd triumphed in blizzards and darkness once more. Around 9 p.m., as Jennifer poured tea, the back door creaked. She thought it was the wind, but a stranger's shadow appeared, a woman with vacant eyes, breathing fast. Before anyone could react, she walked to the crib, bent down, and picked up the baby. Jennifer screamed, lunged, grabbing the woman's arm, wrestling for the crying child. The shout snapped Joe from his chair, his old heart pounding. In that instant, he wasn't a pained old man. His instinct as a leader of armies surged. He rushed forward, grappling the woman, trying to free the baby. The struggle lasted seconds, but Joe later said it felt like an entire season. His hands burned with pain, his back stabbed, but he didn't let go. Finally, Jennifer yanked the baby back, clutching it tightly, while Joe pushed the woman out and locked the door. He stood there, gasping, sweating, back aching so much he leaned against the wall. In that moment, red police lights flashed through the window, reflecting on the old helmet hanging in the living room, the helmet that saw 4 Super Bowls, now glowing like a strange symbol amid chaos. When police arrived, they arrested the woman, a stranger who'd broken in through the back door. Delusional, thinking the child was hers. Jennifer trembled, holding the sobbing baby. Joe sank into a chair, hands gripping his knees, breathing heavily, scanning the room, once a haven of peace, now chaotic like an old battle reborn. The next morning's headlines read, "Joe Montana, Hall of Famer saves grandchild in home invasion." Papers called him a hero. TV replayed images of the silver-haired man, smiling faintly but with deep eyes. When a reporter asked how he felt, Joe said, "I didn't think. I just acted. I couldn't save my body, but I could save my family." Those words silenced America. In a world used to seeing him as superhuman, that simple confession revealed something human: a father, a grandfather, a man who'd lost so much but still had one thing to protect. That evening, after the police left and Jennifer soothed the baby to sleep, Joe sat quietly in the chair. The living room lights were off, only the red glow from the yard flickering through the window, dancing on the faded helmet on the wall. That shimmering light made it seem alive, watching him, reminding him not all victories come on the field. Joe looked at his sleeping grandchild, its tiny hand clutching his finger, and a slow smile spread across his wrinkled face. He whispered to Jennifer, "I saved a lot of games, but tonight was the first time I saved what really matters." She touched his shoulder, tears falling, not from fear, but from knowing life had given him another chance to feel alive. That Malibu night, with the sound of waves and the cold, salty breeze, wasn't just a tale of escape. It was the miracle of a man used to living with pain, winning not by strength, but by love. As Joe walked the hallway to check the doors, each step brought his gaze to old photos on the wall, moments of lifting trophies, hugging teammates, smiling on victory stages. Under the dim light, those images seemed to fade into the dark, leaving only the silhouette of family: Jennifer, their children, and the tiny grandchild in their arms. For the first time in years, Joe Montana didn't think of the past, his career, or the pain. He only felt his heart beating steadily, strongly, peacefully. Outside, the waves kept crashing, rhythmic as that heartbeat. And in the small Malibu house, the man who was once a legend stood watching the red light reflect on the old helmet, knowing this was his final victory, not on the field, but in his home, among those he loved, in a moment when darkness seemed to engulf all. Yet family brought the light back. Mornings in Sonoma always begin with a thin layer of fog, like a veil draping over the vineyards and sun-dappled hills. At the end of a dirt road, a wooden gate opens to a vast expanse, Villa Montana, a 500-acre estate where wine is aged with time and silence. Rows of vines stretch along the slopes. The valley breeze carries a cool, earthy scent, and in the distance, the stables echo with soft neighs, like a morning greeting. Here, Joe Montana lives the quietest and loneliest years of his life. He wakes before dawn. Jennifer is usually in the kitchen, setting a kettle to boil on the gas stove, white steam rising like indoor mist. Joe steps onto the porch, breathing deeply the smell of wet soil and wild grass, then slowly walks to a small gym beside the wine cellar. There, instead of weights and machines, Pilates bands hang from a steel frame. "Your spine isn't built for war anymore," a doctor once told him. "Make exercise a conversation, not a fight." So each morning, Joe converses with his back through slow motions: pull, release, hold, breathe. He twists, feeling the scar along his spine like an old rope, sharp pain flaring with each stretch. When his hands tremble from fatigue, he pauses, resting his forehead lightly on the wooden frame, sighing. Each completed exercise brings no applause, only the faint creak of the bands retracting, and sometimes a whispered, "Good job," from Jennifer at the doorway. On days with less pain, Joe calls them small wins. He writes in his notebook, "No sharp pain, 10 steps, without pause." Those brief words make Jennifer both ache and swell with pride. In a world that once counted yards and points, Joe now counts breaths and steps. Breakfast is simple: toast, soft-boiled eggs, and hot black coffee. From the kitchen window, the vineyards stretch to the horizon. Sometimes, a hawk swoops to the fence, bobbing as if inspecting the lineup. Joe laughs, pointing, "Our scout." Jennifer smiles, pouring more coffee. Then he dons a heavy jacket, grabs a wooden cane, and walks out among the vines. The vineyard workers greet, "Morning, Mr. Montana," and he responds slowly, chatting briefly, asking which vines need pruning, which rows need support after the previous night's strong winds. He no longer has the strength to carry grape crates, but when selecting clusters, his eyes are as sharp as when he read opposing defenses, spotting early ripening grapes, wilted leaves, or drooping branches from lack of water. In autumn, the winery hums with the rich scent of fermenting fruit. Oak barrels lined in rows labeled Cabernet, Block 4, 24 months. Joe walks among them, hand-grazing the smooth, cool wood. He tells the manager, "Good wine is like a final drive, not always about power, but always about timing." The manager laughs, "And it always needs a quarterback who knows how to wait." Joe nods. Waiting, a verb he's learned anew since leaving the field. Waiting for pain to pass. Waiting for long nights to shorten. Waiting for dawn to slant through the porch. At noon, he leads a horse to the field. The old gray mare, named Candy, a nod to John Candy, nuzzles his shoulder. Joe strokes her mane, whispering as if to an old friend. He doesn't ride long, just a slow loop by the fence, watching white butterflies settle on the grass. Halfway up the hill stands an old oak. Beneath its canopy is a wooden chair overlooking the valley. That's where Joe likes to sit in the afternoon, when the fog lifts and sunlight pours down like honey. Usually, he's silent. Rarely, he speaks to himself or to someone long gone. "Dwight," he calls softly, as if afraid to stir the mist. Dwight Clark, the man who caught the throw the world called the catch. They once sat here together, laughing, recalling Clark leaping like a kite, fingertips grazing the ball. "You saved me that day," Joe told Dwight at a reunion. "I threw too high." Dwight laughed. "Not too high, just high enough for me to fly." In 2018, Dwight died of ALS. The day Joe got the news, he stood under the oak for hours. The sun was harsh, the wind hot, but inside him was a cold rain. He looked skyward, seeing a thin cloud drifting like Clark's outstretched hand one last time. He was the one who caught my throw. Now he's the one I can't reach, Joe whispered. Since then, passing the vines near the hill, he looks up, as if an invisible pass still hangs in the air, waiting for someone to catch it. Late afternoons, Joe and Jennifer go to the wine cellar. They pour samples, sniff, swirl, study the color. He doesn't always distinguish plum or vanilla sometimes. Numbness in his hand makes the glass wobble, but he's patient. Wine is time poured into a glass, he says, and time is both medicine and a blade. Jennifer understands. She clinks her glass to his, saying softly, "To days with less pain." Joe smiles, "And to those who've gone." Then he raises his glass slowly. "Here's to the ones who left the field too soon." In that list of those who've gone, it's not just Dwight, but names that lower his voice when mentioned. Bill Walsh, his mentor, teammates lost to illness, accidents, or simply time's call. In Joe's memory, they all wear red jerseys, running under a sky flecked with lights, sweat gleaming on their cheeks. Night falls quickly in Sonoma. Fog from the valley rises, wrapping Villa, Montana like a thick cloak. Joe returns inside, places his wool cap on the shelf, swaps muddy boots for soft slippers. On the wall are black and white photos. Him hugging Dwight, laughing with Bill, cradling a football with Jennifer at an old party. One shows him throwing, body curved perfectly, like a sustained musical note. He lingers longer on that one. His eyes reflect the golden lamplight, and for a moment a flicker of regret passes through. Then he turns away, knowing regret is a rain that can't be stopped. Before bed, Joe opens his notebook, writing a line. "Still here, vineyard quiet, back held." Beside it, Jennifer adds, "Little win." He smiles, closes the book. Tonight, his back hurts less, his fingers twitch less. That's enough for a man who's lived a life of games without scoreboards. Lying in bed, he listens to the wind through the vines, the distant clop of hooves in the stables, the sounds of a place that shines without spotlights. He thinks of his grandchild in Malibu, of the lesson learned late. Winning isn't always about scoring, but sometimes about holding on to what can't be replaced. Sonoma taught him a new kind of resilience, not fighting time, but walking with it gently. The next morning, fog blankets the valley again, dew on the vines sparkling like tiny trophies. Joe steps onto the porch, stretching his back as the doctor instructed. Each movement is a greeting to a body that's betrayed and saved him through lessons of patience. At the estate's edge, a trail vanishes into the brush, a path he can no longer run, but still knows how to see with kind eyes. He lifts last night's unfinished wine glass, holding it to the light, the sun piercing its ruby hue like a quiet bell. "Here's to the ones who left the field too soon," he says again, voice soft as fog. Then he takes a small sip, sets the glass down, and smiles. At Villa, Montana, every pain-free day is a silent triumph. And in Sonoma's thin mist, the man once a god of calm has found another kind of calm, not from cheers or scoreboards, but from the wind's breath through the vines and the gentle acceptance that some of life's most beautiful passes don't need catching, for they're thrown to dissolve into the sky, leaving behind a perfect arc of peace. In 2000, 21 years after the catch shook America, Joe Montana stepped onto the podium in Canton, Ohio, the sacred hall of football legends. Summer sunlight glinted off the iconic gold Hall of Fame jacket, shimmering on the wrinkles at his eyes. As the microphone was handed to him, tens of thousands rose, chanting, "Joe, Joe, Joe, Joe," as if time hadn't passed. But when Joe spoke, his voice was low, hoarse, light as a breeze. He didn't talk about throws, MVP awards, or 4 Lombardi trophies. He looked at the crowd, raised his right arm hand scarred by 3 surgeries, index finger slightly curled, and said, "Every scar is a story of not giving up." The crowd fell silent. Those plain words carried more weight than any trophy. For Montana, his true legacy wasn't in victories, but in scars. Each one was a chapter of perseverance, proof of how many times he fell and rose again. After that speech, Joe left Canton not as a hero stepping down, but as an ordinary man returning to life. He didn't take commentary jobs, start ad agencies, or chase a second glory. He chose a quieter path, using his own pain to help others suffering the same. Since 2001, he's funded a San Francisco rehabilitation hospital treating former athletes with spinal and knee injuries. He visits unannounced, in a simple button-up shirt, walking slowly among the beds, asking each patient, "Where does it hurt most?" When they point, he nods, saying softly, "I've hurt there too, but you'll be okay if you don't give up." Many later said a single touch from his trembling hand gave them more hope than any painkiller. Joe also founded a sports scholarship fund for low-income students recovering from injuries but persisting in their studies. He said, "I don't want them to learn how to win. I want them to learn how to get back up." Under the fund's logo, he etched a small line, "Pain is temporary. Character is forever." At Villa Montana, on a small bookshelf in his study, he keeps dozens of handwritten letters from those he's helped: a student who lost a leg in an accident, a volleyball player paralyzed on one side, a veteran recovering from hip surgery. All wrote the same, "Thank you for making me believe I'm not finished." Joe doesn't see himself as a hero. He always says, "I'm just sharing the lesson of pain. It's the one thing I have more of than glory." When reporters ask about wealth, Montana just laughs. "I don't need to hoard, because I don't want my kids growing up thinking value lies in money. What I want to pass on is how to endure and keep going." Once, his son Nate, who tried football but quit due to injury, asked, "Dad, how do you become great?" Joe looked at him long, then said slowly, "If you want to be great, learn to lose first." The answer stunned Nate. Only someone who's fallen to the depths understands that failure isn't the end, it's the foundation of character. Whenever he can, Joe appears at fundraisers for disabled children. A famous 2015 photo shows him on a plastic chair among a row of kids with prosthetics and braces. He holds a football, signing it, hand trembling so much the M is crooked, but his smile is strikingly genuine. A girl asked, "Mister, are you ever scared?" Joe laughed, "Sure am. But fear's a sign you're still alive." The room erupted in applause. For group photos, he lowered himself so his head was level with the kids. A reporter said that in that moment, Joe Montana wasn't a legend, he was a living testament to humility, strength forged through suffering. Each time he returns home from such events, Jennifer finds him quietly removing his shoes, sitting down, rubbing his swollen hand. She asks, "Does it hurt?" He smiles, replying softly, "Yeah, but it's good pain." In recent years, when old highlight reels play, Montana rarely watches. He says he's seen enough of the past. What matters is the present, where he can still wake up, do a few Pilates moves, and feel he's still trying. On the bookshelf, beside the thank you letters, is his old notebook, the one he's written in since the painful years. Now, the final page holds a new line, scrawled in shaky but firm handwriting, "Still here, still grateful." That's how he closes a life full of scars, not with the roar of victory, but with the peace found at last. As sunset falls over Sonoma Valley, red sunlight streams through the window, illuminating the scarred hand holding a faded football. Joe Montana looks up, smiles, gently tosses the ball into the air, and catches it with trembling hands. The ball lands cleanly, no fumble. A perfect catch, as if the wounds, time, and pain have learned to rest quietly in his hands. Outside, the wind sighs through the vines, carrying echoes of distant stadiums. His legacy is no longer records or trophies, but the ability to turn scars into stories, pain into compassion, and to remind the world that sometimes the greatest thing a person can leave behind isn't victory, but how they rise after falling. At 69, Joe Montana lives more slowly, speaks less, and remembers less. His memory, once a superhuman archive that could recall every defensive scheme, every opponent's movement, now begins to crack. Some mornings, he pauses in the hallway of Villa Montana, looks around, and asks Jennifer, "Where'd we put the keys?" Small questions, but his voice carries the quiet sorrow of a man who once controlled every moment on the field, now learning to accept his own forgetfulness. His eyes have dimmed, vision blurring when reading the paper, requiring a magnifying glass for the fine print. His back is more hunched, his steps slow, each one needing support. But there's nothing pitiable in his demeanor, only the gentle grace of someone who's weathered storms and learned to smile in silence. The Sonoma house now echoes with children's voices. Grandkids run through the garden, their laughter ringing among the vines, mingling with the wind. Joe sits on the wooden porch chair, a faint smile slowly spreading. He no longer throws footballs or teaches the kids to pass, just watches, eyes following their toddling steps. Once his grandson asked, "Grandpa, why don't you throw the ball anymore?" Joe chuckled softly, leaned down, hand on the boy's shoulder. "I can't throw anymore, but I can still hold them." That simple line brought tears to Jennifer's eyes. For Joe, victory no longer lies in throws, but in still being able to embrace what matters most when everything else has slipped away. Each time he hears the kids' laughter in the yard, he closes his eyes, relaxes, letting the sound fill the void once claimed by pain. Children's laughter has become the only music he needs, a melody that takes him back to days when his parents were alive, when he threw into Monongahela's fog, unaware of where the future would lead. Despite age and pain encroaching, Montana keeps small habits. Each morning, he does a few Pilates moves, hands trembling but breathing steady. Each evening, he steps onto the porch, sips half a glass of his own wine, listens to the horses stirring in the stables, and watches the sun set over Sonoma Valley. "Every day I see a sunset is a day I still win," he often says. And Jennifer, standing beside him, just smiles. She knows this man never learned to let go, only to endure with gratitude. Reporters still occasionally seek interviews, filming the Montana legend. They ask about the 4 Super Bowls, the catch, the iconic drives. Joe shakes his head. "I remember the near losses more. Those moments taught me who I am." When asked about his legacy, he pauses long, then says slowly, "My legacy isn't 4 Lombardi trophies. It's the people who stood by me, teammates, coaches, my family. They're why I never gave up." At nearly 70, Montana no longer carries the ruggedness of Joe Cool, but the gentleness of someone who's learned limits. His hand trembles when signing autographs, letters crooked, but his smile remains genuine. Whenever someone says, "Thank you for making my childhood," he bows his head and replies, "No, thank you for remembering me." For Joe, being remembered not as a legend, but as a person is the ultimate reward. One afternoon, he visited Ringgold High School, where it all began. On the gym wall hung an old photo, teenage Joe Montana, in a faded yellow uniform, holding a football with both hands, eyes timid. He stood before it a long time, smiling. An old teacher approached, whispering, "You've come a long way, Joe." Montana turned, eyes warm. "I just went around a few fields and came back here." Back in Sonoma, he learned another former teammate died of heart disease. He poured a glass of wine, looked out at the field, and said softly, "Here's to the ones who left the field too soon." Those names, Bill Walsh, Dwight Clark, Ronnie Lott, are now echoes in his memory. He knows one day someone will say the same of him, but that's okay. He's left enough not in stats, but in the hearts of those who saw him throw, smile, hurt, and rise again. One late autumn afternoon, Joe and Jennifer visited Levi's Stadium, the 49ers' current home. The game was over, the stands empty. They walked a long corridor, wind whistling through. At the east exit, sunset bathed a bronze statue of Joe Montana, arms raised with a Lombardi trophy, metal gleaming in the fading light. He stopped, looking up at himself. A strange moment, as if meeting the fearless youth who thought victory was forever. Jennifer gently squeezed his hand. He said nothing, just gazed long. Then he smiled the smile of a man who's finally forgiven himself. As they walked away, a reporter's camera panned slowly across the empty stands, settling on the statue. Wind blew, leaves scattered, orange light blanketed the field. A voice narrated, deep and warm, like a farewell to an era. The legend who conquered every fourth quarter now fights the final one time. But if grace is measured by how we endure, Joe Montana already won the greatest game of all. And out there, where the last sunset melted into the horizon, Joe Montana looked up at the red-tinged sky, eyes still bright. He knows he's no longer strong, fast, or precise as before. But watching the kids play in the yard, their laughter ringing in the wind, he smiles a smile light as a breath. In that moment, time seems to pause. No pain, no scars, no limits. Just a man who once made America believe in miracles, now living simply, peacefully, and full of gratitude. At 69, Joe Montana can no longer throw a football, but he can still embrace this world with all that remains in his hands, his heart, and the light of years gone by. And as the sun dips behind Levi's Stadium, his statue's shadow stretches across the empty field, enduring like a memory that never fades. The throws, the smiles, the scars, they weave into one thing: resilience and compassion. That is Joe Montana's true legacy, not victory, but how he lived after those victories passed. Perhaps the tragedy and beauty of Joe Montana lie at the intersection of miracle and cost. From the chicken soup game at the Cotton Bowl, when a 102 degrees Fahrenheit fever couldn't stop him from throwing 3 TDs, to the catch against the Cowboys, and the John Candy quip amid the storm of Super Bowl 23 moments that made America believe composure could bend fate. But his story doesn't end in glory. The 1986 spinal disc surgery with warnings of paralysis, Leonard Marshall's 1,990 hit that fractured his sternum, concussed him, and damaged his ulnar nerve, letting the ball slip from his hand for the first time, and with it, his identity. Then the quiet replacement by Steve Young, the Kansas City resurgence dubbed the Old Magic. Before the bitter whisper, the final whistle didn't just end a game, it ended a life I had built. In old age, he writes, still here, still hurts, does Pilates at Villa Montana, toasts Dwight Clark. He was the one who caught my throw. Now he's the one I can't reach. Saves his grandchild in a Malibu night and says, I couldn't save my body, but I could save my family. At the 2000 Hall of Fame, he concludes, every scar is a story of not giving up. The lesson for America today isn't chasing glory, but learning to rise, accepting replacement without resentment, valuing family, community, and small wins, a restful night, 10 painless steps, as lasting worth, turning wounds into service, funding rehab hospitals, sports scholarships, teaching his kids, if you want to be great, learn to lose first. At Levi's Stadium, sunset bathes Montana's bronze statue, trophy raised, reminding us that dignity is measured by endurance. The legend who conquered every fourth quarter now fights the final one time. And in that way, he's won the greatest game, being a decent man through pain. Thank you for joining us on this journey of tears and resilience with the legend Joe Montana, who turned pain into strength and left a legacy of perseverance. Please subscribe, share this video, and join us for the next story about the great people who taught America how to rise after every fall.